to our first 3 lectures. Woohoo! Yeah. Huzzah, right? Well, welcome again to our 4th Fireside Lecture, Seeking Juneau's Hidden Stories Underwater. We have Annette Smith here, who's a longtime diver in Juneau, and her best friend, Lindsay Wheeler, who's in the Coast Guard, has been diving with Annette for quite some time. They're going to talk to you tonight about their treasures. I want to give a shout out to KTOO and the Juneau Community Calendar for advertising the event. And without further ado, I'm going to hand the mic to Annette.
Oh, all right. Can we get the lights down?
Yeah, we're going to turn lights down.
I'm amazed that all of you guys came out and in this weather and braved the can you hear me through the mic?
Okay, closer to your face, maybe?
Is it on?
Yeah, it's on.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, put it up. Okay.
Swallow it. It is on? Yeah,
It's that little light?
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, I'm really excited that you guys came out. I drove over here about 4 and it was really nasty on the roads. I applaud you for coming. So welcome to our presentation. What we do is muddy and dirty and stinky. And but we look for Juneau and Douglas stories underwater instead of on land. So if you came here to see beautiful photography, you came to the wrong place.
Okay,
We do not carry good cameras around when we are rooting for treasure. So an old GoPro is what you get. We hope to give you a bit of a taste of what it's like to find underwater treasures. And after they're found, what do we do with them? One thing is for sure, the sea delivers mysteries in this process. So we will show you some fun stories and some that we have no answer for yet. Digging out an embossed bottle is a slow, or any treasure is a slow process. You have to make sure you don't damage your find, and yet you also have to move the ground that's holding it prisoner. Often that means you silt yourself out, so you cannot even see your treasure or anything. You have no idea where up or down is, and you stay in that state until the silt is settled and moved away by the current. So let's take a look and see what it looks like just to dig something out of the bottom. What it looks like when you silt yourself out. So what do we find when we're down there? Well, we find a little bit of everything. We find bottles, steamship dinnerware, silverware, old mining crucibles, and then there are the surprise finds, guns and swords and gravestones and skulls, both human and animal, cell phones and credit cards, and lots and lots and lots of beer bottles. Future archaeologists will say that we love our beer. So, did you lose your cell phone? Or maybe you're looking for a shopping cart. Or how about a rifle? And some things that we find are really easy to bring up. This find took a team of 2 divers and shore assistants. You can see it there on the right. It was bronze and concrete. Mr. McNaughton's tombstone weighed over 50 pounds, requiring a lift bag and shore crew to get it out of the water. By reading old newspapers, I found he moved to Alaska shortly after he married, going to work for B.M. Barron's Bank in 1903 as a cashier, and he ended as a vice president at the time of his death. He was highly thought of and served on the school board and the city council. He was a gun collector, a hunter, a fisherman. He was a mason, an elk, a moose, and a pioneer. He passed away quietly in his sleep at St. Anne's Hospital of heart problems. He is mentioned in hundreds of Alaska newspapers, and the Alaska Daily Empire on April 5th, 1939, carried his obituary. So after searching where Mr. McNaughton was buried, the tombstone was turned over to the city and borough of Juneau, as they are the keepers of Evergreen Cemetery. So how and why did his tombstone end up under the water by the docks? That mystery has never been solved. Other things that we find don't come up so easy. This one took multiple dives, tow trucks, salvage operators, etc., to bring this sucker up. And sometimes the sea serves us mysteries, and sometimes she tells us the truth. And oftentimes, people do not want to know the truth. This truth has been met with much resistance, except from one surprise entity. So, if you haven't heard the story of the Princess Sophia, she's a Canadian Pacific steamship, and she went aground on Vanderbilt Reef on October 23 in 1918. So after spending 40 hours on the reef, she went down, taking all souls with her. She is the Pacific Northwest's worst marine disaster. There were no witnesses or survivors to tell exactly what happened in her last moments. The captain's log has never been found. All there is communications between rescue ships that could not stand by the Sophia on her last night due to the severity of the storm. So why is it that history reports her boilers exploding as the reason she went down? No one saw it. No one heard it. Well, it appears to be something similar to that old game you played when you were a kid. You whisper something in someone's ear and they pass it to the next person who passes it to the next person. And when it gets to the end of the line, it's not at all like what the first person whispered. So this is an article from the October 28th, 1918 Alaska Daily Empire. It was written 3 days after the Sophia went down. It states, some believe that as soon as the waters rushed in, there may have been a boiler explosion. Some believe, may have been. This doesn't sound like facts to me. So what happens when a ship's boiler explodes? It is a catastrophic failure. Even today, a ship's boilers are considered one of the deadliest machinery systems on board. So think of it this way. If you have a boiler in your house, it's a small one, it will be much, much smaller than what the Sophia had. The energy released when a 30-gallon home hot water tank flashes into explosive failure at 332 degrees, you have enough force to send the average car, which weighs about 2,500 pounds, to a height of 125 feet at a starting liftoff velocity of 85 miles an hour. That information is from the National Board of Boiler and Pressure Vessel Inspectors. And I think they know what they're talking about. So just imagine what the explosion of Sophia's 3 12-foot by 12-foot boilers would look like if they exploded. Now, this article was in a Victoria, BC newspaper, the Daily Colonist, and it's dated December 31st, 1918. The diver reports the Princess Sophia is still whole and could be raised. Clearly, there was no boiler explosion. So why did the explosion become fact? Is it because it made a better story in the newspaper? Or perhaps it was a way to make sense of such a huge tragedy? I don't know the answer. But what I do know is that an undocumented story perpetuates and becomes fact. This example shows the exploding boilers written by the University of Victoria history class, published on the internet, and easily found using a Google search. This is only one example of many write-ups on the internet regarding the boilers exploding. I would trust something I read from the university, wouldn't you? The truth is, history, historical books, museums, and even the Sea Hunters TV show are in error. Don't believe me? Well, you shouldn't just take my word for it. So let's take a look at her boilers as they are today. In this video that I shot diving the Sophia 100 years after her sinking, you can clearly see her 3 Scotch Marine single-ended boilers lying on the bottom, whole, with the ship collapsing around them. But at least one entity got it correct, Wikipedia. With so much misinformation roaming around, it's nice to know that someone, somewhere, got it right.
Well, now that we know about one of the stories that diving the Canadian Pacific steamship Princess Sophia can tell us, what about the other steamships? The Princess Sophia was just one of the many that provided service along Southeast Alaska during the 20th century. We know this because, if we are lucky, we divers can find a variety of dinnerware left underwater while diving in Juneau's harbor. This picture was from a dive that we did in summer of 2021. That day we found 9 teacups, 4 from the Alaska Steamship Company, which you can see up front, 3 from Canadian Pacific Railway, which you can see stacked behind the Alaska Pacific Steamship teacups, 1 from British Columbia Steamship Company, and 1 from the U.S. Navy. We found a number of plates and bowls from other steamship companies, like the Admiral Line, the Great Northern Pacific Steamship, and we also found crew mess-style dinnerware that you can see in the lower left that's not logoed. Now, we normally do not find this much at once. However, it's not unusual to at least find a good sampling from the common lines. And while the china does look really nice and pretty at the surface, it does not look the same underwater. So this is what we usually encounter while diving here in Juneau. It is dark, there are a lot of sharp objects and hazards, and the mud in Juneau's harbor creates enormous clouds of silt when disturbed. Sometimes we have no choice but to wait for the huge plumes of silt to calm down. Otherwise, we can get vertigo, get lost, or risk running into something. Annette and I try to stay together as dive buddies, but sometimes I lose Annette in the blink of an eye and will have to finish the dive by myself. The plate that I found in this video was from the Canadian Pacific Railway. But why do we find so much of this old stuff? Well, based on Juneau's historical mining and tourism history dating back to the late 1800s, it is not surprising at all. Now, most of us know that Juneau was a popular destination in the past due to the gold rush. But what I have also found is that Juneau was a popular destination for tourism, much like it still is today. Since 1881, tourists have been alongside gold prospectors, cruising the Inside Passage when the Pacific Coast Steamship Company began offering service from the lower 48. However, sailing was a different experience back then compared to what it is today. First was the cost. Standard cabin rates from Seattle were $30, first class $55, and freight rates were only $11 per ton. Another major difference that sailing on a steamship was the dining experience. Steamship dining rooms were wide and spacious, often accounting for an entire midsection of the ship. They had pianos, huge stained glass domes, polished wood finishes, and offered 3 wholesome meals a day, included with your ticket cost. The Canadian Pacific steamship Princess Kathleen's dining room could accommodate 166 guests. It was described as paneled in tones of ivory with doors and other fittings in mahogany. Paired oval windows in the ship's side gave light and were curtained in rich red silk. The flooring was green with white tile. So above in this slide is a lunch menu from July 31st, 1933, from the steamship Yukon. For lunch, you could choose from lamb pot pie with homemade dumplings, grilled pork tenderloin with country gravy, or prime ribs of beef and horseradish. And you were likely served with beautiful top-stamped china featuring the line of the steamship you were sailing on with decorated silverware. If you dined with the captain, your china may have been rimmed with a gold band, as seen in this photo. So why do we find this very well-made, very beautiful china and dinnerware in the water? Well, I have a couple of different theories, but essentially what I think it boils down to is that there were almost no regulations for ships when it came to throwing trash or other unwanted items overboard, either while at sea or moored in port. Sometimes I picture a mess cook not wanting to clean a bowl, or a plate getting cracked, or someone simply wanting to replace their old china with a new set and throwing it all straight overboard into Juneau's harbor for us to find 100 years later. And from our finds, we had learned a great deal about the ships that serviced Juneau. We know what ship a piece of china may have came from books authored by researchers like Carl Spence and Jacques Marc. And so how do we identify which steamship company owned a particular piece of china and where that piece was used? Well, first we look at the top mark decoration. As you can see in the upper left portion of the slide, it can either be a ring logo, a house flag, an anchor, or a shield. In this example, it is a ring logo. Then the next step is to date the china is to look at the back stamp. The back stamp is on the back of the plate and is seen in the right-hand side of this photo. The back stamp provides the manufacturing, a date code, and distributor information. So this is a Canadian Pacific, British Columbia Coast steamship piece. Research from Jacques Marc's Ship China book explains that Canadian Pacific introduced the checkered flag in 1891 and retired it in 1968. And again, the checkered flag is what I'm referring to in the ring logo in the top left. BC Coast Steamships formed in 1903 and ceased operations in 1974. John Maddock and Sons, which is the back stamp, introduced the Red Lion back in 1945, and Marshall Wells, which is labeled below the John Maddock and Sons, was formed in 1899 and operated until 1957. Based on this timeline and overlap, this dates the china to between 1945 and 1957. And here are some more of the very common pieces we find in Juneau, being from Great Northern Pacific, Alaska Steamship, Canadian Pacific, and U.S. Navy. And this is their logos and their back stamps.
So these were some interesting finds. We kept finding these pieces at the steamship docks, but no one knew where they were from. It took a few years to find out this was from a company called the West Line, which served Juneau from 1969 to 1971. The West Line was a division, of West Tours. West Tours was created by Chuck West of Seattle in 1957 to consolidate his hotels, buses, and ships under one umbrella company. Westline was introduced as a subsidiary in 1969 to operate the cruise ship West Star, which was formerly named the Cabo Azara, on the Seattle to Skagway run. Holland America, and you all have seen them in town, Holland America purchased West Tours, including the West Line, in March of 1971. Holland America continued to operate the West Star until 1974, after which the Princendam took her place. And if you guys have been in Juneau or Alaska for very long, you probably remember the story of the Princendam. She was transiting through the Gulf of Alaska waters, approximately 120 miles south. I'm not sure what happened, but we disappeared.
Tap your, I wonder if it wasn't active long enough. Go ahead and tap.
What are we supposed to do?
Just tap anywhere on your keyboard.
We got nothing.
We can put it in presentation mode again. Look at the current slide.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah. It's dark and I can't see anything here, so.
That's a good sign. I think it'll work now.
Yeah, I'm just helping her see.
Okay.
Oh, are we back? Yay! All right. So anyway, the Princendam, if you all remember her, in October 4th, 1980, she had a fire break out in her engine room. About an hour after the fire broke out, the Princendam sent out a distress call requesting immediate assistance. And the Coast Guard station here in Juneau coordinated that rescue effort. All passengers and crew were rescued. 1 week after the rescue began, while she was being towed to Portland, she was a $25 million ship, and she rolled on her side, and within 3 minutes, she sank. She was only 7 years old. And what happened to the West Star? Well, she continued to sail from West Coast ports until 1975, when she became the Filipino cruise ship, the Donna Montserrat, in the late 1970s. She was then sold to China and became the Xinghu and was scrapped in the year 2000. So one thing that happens when ships are sold is their dinnerware, their chamber pots, their blankets, everything that's on the ship goes with the ship. And it's up to the company that's purchasing the ship to replace all those items with their own logoed items. So to find out about this piece of china and what it was doing in Juneau, one must track the life of a ship. Who owned it, when they sold it, who they sold it to, etc. So the Panama Railroad Steamship Company, was in service from 1896 to 1961. So what was it doing in Juneau? Well, they had two ships, the Cologne and the Panama, and those two ships were sold to Alaska Steamship Line in 1923 and renamed the Yukon and the Emulsion. Juneau was a port of call for both of those ships. The Emulsion sank off of Kodiak Island in May of 1929, and the Yukon hit the rocks in Johnstone Bay, which is southeast of Seward, in 1946 and broke into two. No other ships from the Panama Railroad serviced Alaska. So this piece found at the downtown docks is either from the Yukon or the Emulsion. And the Grace Line. Grace Line had a number of freighters. In 1936, 3 of the Grace Line ships were sold. The Santa Olivia went to Libby, McNeil, and Libby for Alaska salmon packing and was renamed the David W. Branch. The Santa Ana and the Santa Elisa were sold to Alaska Steamship Company and named the Mount McKinley and the Baranoff. Alaska Steamship bought a lot of used boats. So as I said earlier, when ships are sold, all the things go with the ship. So this piece came from an Alaska line ship named either Mount McKinley or the Baranof. And who the heck is the Red D line, and how did they end up in Alaska? This is a piece from a chamber pot that I found at the downtown docks. Well, the Red D line ran ships out of New York to South America from 1889 to 1938. 2 of their passenger ships were sold and ended up in the Pacific Northwest. One ship, the Carabobo, was sold to Northland Transportation and renamed the North Coast and made its first voyage to Alaska in 1938. She continued service until 1941, when she was taken over by the War Shipping Administration. She was then sold to the Philippines and caught fire in the Far East in 1955, and she was a total loss. The other ship, the Caracas, was transferred to the Grace Line and then sold to Alaska Steamship Company in December of 1938. She was renamed the Denali. She made her first voyage to Alaska in 1938 and was taken over again by, like the other previous ship, by the War Shipping Administration in 1941. And then she was sold to the P&O line, who renamed her the Cuba. She was later renamed to the Southern Cross and was scrapped in 1960. So again, when ships are sold, their items go with the ship. This piece came from either the Carabobo, which was renamed the North Coast, or the Caracas, which was renamed the Denali. Both of those ships had Juneau as a port of call.
So the glass I found in the last video was from the Alaska Steamship Company. On the same dive right next to that glass, I found another glass, this time from the Canadian Pacific Steamship Company, which you can see in the photo. When I found them, I was shocked that both the logos were in such good condition, considering that they had probably been in salt water, rolling around in Juneau's harbor for the last 50 years at least. When I showed Annette my finds, she did some research to try to find out the age of these steamship glasses. We found out that both of these glasses are what's known as pyroglazed. Pyroglazing started in 1934. It is an enamel paint mixed with pigment, minerals, and ground glass. It becomes a thick paste that is then applied to the glassware using a silk screening method. The glass is then fired again using a much lower temperature than when it was manufactured. As you move into the 1960s, the quality of enamel is diminished and resulted in modern labels not lasting longer than about 10 years. Due to this, we think that both the glasses were made sometime between 1934 and 1960.
So we not only find steamship china and glassware, we also find silverware from the ships. It is usually not in very good condition, but often it has the emblems, and from those emblems we know which line carried it. But sometimes we find silverware with an emblem we do not know. So who or what is George House? I'm pretty sure it's not the California or British politicians found on internet searches. So in researching old newspaper advertisements, the December 5th, 1913 edition of the Alaska Daily Empire has an ad for the St. George House. Is this piece of silverware from there? I do not know yet. So the search continues. Perhaps one of you know about George House.
And one of the most interesting mysteries that we have come upon was from the British Columbia Salvage Company. This is the only piece belonging to a salvage company that Annette or myself have seen while diving in Juneau, and we have wondered, what was it doing in Juneau? Perhaps British Columbia Salvage Company worked some of the steamship wrecks in our area. Well, after doing some research, I found out that they did. Although they only had 2 ships during their lifetime, the company performed many historic salvage operations surrounding Juneau. Pictured on the left is the BC Salvage tug, William Joliffe, alongside the Princess May, escorting her into Juneau's harbor after her world-famous grounding on Sentinel Island in 1910. To the right is the BC Salvage tug Tess performing dive operations on the wrecked Princess Sophia in 1918. And of course, the big question for me when I found this piece was if we could tell what salvage operation that it may have been a result of. So I did some more research, and I already knew that the tug William Joliffe was in Juneau's harbor in 1910 based on the earlier photo with the Princess May. But what about the Princess Sophia salvage? Well, I found through this article that she did also pull into Juneau after working the Princess Sophia wreck for a port call before returning to Victoria. And after finding out that both BC Salvage tugs were at one point moored in Juneau, I of course secretly hoped that I could prove it being tied to the Princess Sophia instead of the Princess May. So I thought that maybe if the china was manufactured after 1910 and after the grounding of the Princess May, then it would have been impossible for it to be carried on the William Joliffe. Well, unfortunately, after looking up the piece in the back stamp in Pacific Ship China, I found that British Columbia Salvage Company only carried one style of china, manufactured in 1907. This means it could have came from either wreck. So we will leave the question to you. Which wreck do you believe this saucer is tied to?
So this photo is is a very recent one. We did a dive on October 9th, 2023 in Douglas. Notice the last bottle, the one that's embossed. We're going to talk about that bottle in just a little bit. So when we pick up a bottle, how do we know that it is old? Well, bottle dating is not exactly a precise science, but we can use some clues about the body, the mold, the shape, and the style of the bottle we find to determine its approximate age. Some bottle shapes are indicative of a particular manufacturing area, though many bottle styles and shapes were used for so many years that the shape itself cannot be indicative of its age. And then there's the fact that the art and science of glass making had a lot of glass blower induced uniqueness in the form of variations, errors, experimentations, and retrogressions. All this adds to the fascination with bottle making, but makes dating a bottle similar to solving a Rubik's Cube. Simple on the surface, really complex in practice. So a good tip for starters is to look for bottles with a cork top rather than a screw top. Screw top bottles rose in popularity around the 1920s and the 1930s. But before then, bottles were sealed with corks and may have been intentionally manufactured to lay on their side, which is what we call a torpedo bottle or a round bottom bottle. But if you're me and I have a simple mind and don't like a lot of complexity, I just take my dive light and shine it up in the bottle and see if there's any bubbles in the glass. You can also use colors and mold seams and shoulders and other clues. And of course, there's the embossing. But I still like to just shine my light up, see if there's any bubbles in the glass. So these bottles I found at the downtown docks. They're Eastman Kodak photographic chemical bottles. There was a photography shop in town called the Winter and Pond. Winter and Pond Company shop was in the Horseshoe Building on South Main Street in the late 1920s. Lloyd Winter and Edmund Pond were in business from 1872 to 1943. Pond died in 43 and Winter passed the business to Francis Harrison in 1945. Harrison ran Winter and Pond until it closed in 1956. Winter and Pond was an Eastman Kodak company. They are a well-known company that photographed much of the early history of Alaska. So it's easy to assume these bottles are from them. But when I started researching old newspaper advertisements, I find that Winter and Pond were not the only Eastman Kodak photographic company in Juneau. There was another company called the Snapshot, which called themselves the home of Eastman Kodak supplies, as well as a company from Seattle that advertised and sold Eastman Kodak by mail order in Juneau. That company was called Northwestern Photo Supply. So while I initially believed these bottles were from Wintern Pond, and secretly I still do believe that, I cannot prove it. And we find a lot of old medicine bottles. Some are embossed and some are not. Some we clean up and some we leave as found. With these finds, we learn about Juneau and Douglas's early medicine habits. In the early days, working class citizens rarely had access to the doctors or medical professionals. As a result, they often relied on over-the-counter homemade potions, remedies, and medicines to treat a wide range of symptoms and conditions. Medicine in the late 1800s to the early 1900s was before the Food and Drug Administration. The FDA started in 1906, but didn't set any drug safety standards until 1938 with the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. And there was little regulation or standardization of the contents of advertised medicine. As a consequence, most of them contained alcohol, opium, cocaine, and a wide variety of addictive as well as some fairly nasty chemical compounds. So let's talk about some of our latest medicine bottle finds in the Douglas waters. There were a variety of drugstores in Douglas: Elmer Smith on Front Street, Alaska Drug Company on St. Anne's, Elliott Drug Company in Rexall, which was also owned by Elmer Smith, just to name a few. So it makes sense that we find many old medicine bottles around Douglas. Sorry, I'm going to have to laugh at this one. There's a personal story behind this one. So this is a cod liver emulsion bottle. And if you remember that first slide that had the bottles on the back of the boat, this was the last one, the embossed one. We found this bottle while diving in the Gastineau Channel off an area that I call the Douglas Bottle Beach on October 9th, 2023. This bottle design started in 1906. The Front Street Druggist advertisement in the October 6, 1915 Douglas Island News lists cod liver oil emulsion on sale. Communities had used cod liver oil for generations to restore health and alleviate aches and pains before the doctors and chemists of the 19th century Europe decided they wanted to take a look at it and took some more interest in it. Manufacturing cod liver oil was pretty simple. You cut out the fish livers and you leave the gallbladders attached and you throw them into barrels and you let them decompose. Fishermen often applied heat to extract the last bits of oil from this smelly, decaying mess. This process produced a product with a nauseating taste and smell. To overcome that, it was often mixed into coffee, milk, brandy, and some recommended taking the oil with smoked herring, tomato ketchup, or in the froth of malted beverages. But if you were one of those people that had an insurmountable aversion to the taste, you could also take this oil by enema. So enter Alfred Scott and Samuel Brown, who tackled the taste issue. They enhanced theirs with lime and soda to make the taste better. They added some glycerin for sweetness, as well as its tonic and healing properties. And voila, success. But neither Scott nor Brown were doctors or pharmacists by training. What they did have was an eye for opportunity. Advertising, the two men believed, would propel their product into success, and so it did. By the 1890s, Scott and Brown had factories in Canada, England, Spain, Portugal, Italy, and France. And advertised their emulsion throughout the Americas, Europe, and Asia. We found a lot of these bottles diving around Douglas. So what exactly, well, I lost this cursor here. What exactly is the Perry Davis vegetable painkiller? I need to scroll this down. I lost the things. There it is. Okay. Were there really that many vegetables in pain in Douglas? Well, Perry Davis was a really interesting fellow who held many jobs and failed at all of them. One of his jobs was as an ordained minister who spoke about the evils of alcohol and opium. In 1840, while suffering from debilitating pain, Mr. Davis created a thick brown liquid solution that was a mix of opiates and ethyl alcohol. And he put a few herbs in there to make it taste a little better. It eased his pain. Imagine that, huh? In 1843, a fire burned down his house, and he was left deeply in debt. He decided to sell and distribute his painkiller, which he named the Davis Vegetable Painkiller. It was widely regarded as a wonder drug whose ingredients were entirely natural. His painkiller was seen as revolutionary since it offered relief from a wide variety of pain and was not restricted to treating one specific illness. The Reverend Davis generously donated his painkiller to religious missions around the globe. From these religious outposts, dedicated missionaries promoted temperance and decried the evils of alcohol and opium while handing out the painkiller. His painkiller, traveling the world with these missionaries, made it one of the world's first global brands. It was widely used in the battlefields during the Civil War, which was 1861 through 1865, and it was used by both men and horses. Partially due to its success on the battlefield, the Davis painkiller production was not halted during Prohibition, which was 1920 to 1933, because the government agreed the vegetable painkiller was a cure and not a beverage. The success of his painkiller meant other people tried to copy it. So to counteract the counterfeiting, in 1870, this bottle that you can see in the photo was designed to make counterfeiting more difficult. Davis would become one of the richest men in Providence, Rhode Island. He died in 1862. His son Edmund and grandson continued to sell the painkiller after his death. The company disappeared in 1940. So if you look at this photo, notice the brown bottle that's on the right. It still has cork in it. And the medicine was originally a dark brown. You can tell over the years, this one has been diluted a bit by seawater. And no, I did not sample it. So while researching the Perry Davis vegetable painkiller, we found this written review in the autobiography of Mark Twain. It reads, "It was not right to give the cat the painkiller. I realize it now. I would not repeat it in these days. But in those Tom Sawyer days, it was a great and sincere satisfaction to me to see Peter perform under its influence. And if actions speak as loud as words, he took as much interest in it as I did. It was a most detestable medicine, Perry Davis's painkiller. Mr. Pavey's Negro man, who was a person of good judgment and considerable curiosity, wanted to sample it, and I let him. It was his opinion it was made of hellfire." So the moral of this story is the painkiller is great for men and horses, but you should not give it to your cat.
So in the last video was a bottle I found from the Maltine Manufacturing Company. The Maltine Manufacturing Company formed in 1875 in New York. As seen in the newspaper ad from Skagway's druggist in 1900, Maltine was a popular medicine, retailing alongside vegetable painkiller and Hamlin's Wizard oil for only 85 cents. The Maltine in the bottle itself was an extract of barley, wheat, and oats, which was blended with high amounts of alcohol, meant to improve digestion and stomach ailments. The best-selling product was Maltine with cocoa wine, which was basically cocaine and highly addictive. Adults were instructed to take a full glass during and after meals, and children were recommended to take a half glass. And this was also found on Douglas. But besides cocaine, what other ingredients did this company use? Well, the company would take Maltine extract and mixed it with peptones, iron phosphate, quinine, and even strychnine. Although still used in small doses for some medicines today, these chemicals are more commonly found in either slug killer for your garden or in pesticide for rats. And medicine bottles are not the only bottles we find off of Douglas. Sometimes a basic beer bottle has an unexpected story. So this bottle came from a dive that was completely barren on the bottom. It was one of the only bottles Annette and I saw on the entire dive, and I decided to pick it up, noticing it was embossed but not thinking much of it. Once we brought it on Annette's boat, I saw that it read, John Zynda and Sons Bottling Works, Detroit, Michigan. So I wondered, what, if anything, does a beer bottle from Detroit, Michigan have to do with Juneau or Douglas? To find out more, the first thing I did was a quick Google search of Zynda and Juneau. Much to my surprise, I found many references to the Zynda Hotel, a hotel built in 1914 on the corner of 3rd and Main Streets downtown. The building was 5 stories tall and advertised Alaska's very first hotel with an elevator. I found out that a man named Stanislaus Zynda was the builder of this hotel. I thought the name Zynda was so unique that it couldn't be a coincidence that it matched the bottle I found. So I did some more digging about Mr. Zynda. I found out that Stanislaus Zynda was born in 1870 in Poland. Him and his family immigrated to the U.S. in the late 1800s, and then he then graduated from the American Brewing Academy in Chicago. In 1904, he moved to Juneau to become brewmaster of the Douglas City Brewing Company, and then became supervisor of the Eagle City Brewing Company, later known as the Alaska Brewing and Malting Company, also on the corner of 3rd and Main, which is where his hotel was later built. And then I found the connection. Stanislaus had an older brother, John, who established the John Zynda and Sons Brewing Company in Detroit, Michigan in 1919. So perhaps Stanislaus brought up some of John's beer bottles after a trip to the Michigan brewery, or maybe he sold his brother's beer at the Zynda Hotel. But the most surprising connection I learned is with the Alaska Brewing Company's Alaskan Amber beer. It turns out that while the Alaskan Brewing Company's founders were researching brewing in Alaska, they unearthed shipping records from the Douglas City Brewing Company, which, if you remember, Stanislaus was brewmaster of when he first moved here in 1904. The shipping records from Stanislaus listed ingredients for its popular beers, and the founders then found a newspaper article that described the way it was brewed. That beer, Stanislaus's beer, is now known as Alaskan Amber. So although my bottle doesn't say Douglas City Brewing Company, Douglas, Alaska on it, I like to think that it does.
So once we have all this stuff, what do we do with it? Well, some of us, that would be me, simply hoards it. As each piece has a memory of a dive of finding it. My poor son, he's going to get to inherit it all. And sometimes I clean it all up and serve formal dinners on it. And sometimes shards are cleaned. And excuse me while I do a small striptease here. Some of us make jewelry out of it. Jeannie Alford collects beach gas and makes sun catchers with steamship china shards and beach glass.
And what I like to do to help preserve and share the history of old Alaskan bottles is to mold and make beeswax candles out of them. My business partner, Catherine Brownlee, and I make silicone molds and then put beeswax inside of them with cotton wicks down the middle to make a candle. Here's an example. To the left is an Elmer Smith druggist medicine bottle, which, if you remember, was on Front Street in Douglas in the early 1900s. And to the right is the Douglas Dairy bottle and its candle replica. Catherine and I sell the majority of our candles at the Juneau Public Market and also online on our website. We want everyone to have a piece of Alaskan history. So we just gave you a lot of information about bottles, china, and steamships. If you have any question about ships or have any of the bottles of your own that you would like to know more about, here are some online resources that we recommend.
To the castle keep of Carisbrooke, where the treasure lay. And soon I found the diamond at the bottom of the well. But the traitor of a turnkey to his death below he fell. Have a care, 'twas evenly come by, and no good will you find it. Have a care, 'twas evenly stolen, only pain and sorrow there. Have a care. Then across the sea to Holland, with the jewel in my hand, where we went to sell our treasure at the house of Elbrand. When he said it was no diamond, through the window it was cast, that wicked man was lying, we were caught in a double cross. Have a care, 'twas evenly come by, and no good will you find it. Have a care, 'twas evenly stolen, in pain and sorrow there. Have a care. What shall we do with the boy who's stealing? What shall we do with the boy who's stealing? What shall we do with the boy who's stealing? Early in the morning. Throw him in a jail, let him rot forever. Throw him in a jail, let him rot forever. Throw him in a jail, let him rot forever. Early in the morning. Have a care, 'twas evenly come by, and no good will you find it. Have a care, 'twas evenly stolen, in pain and sorrow there.
All hands, hoist the colors high. Heave ho, thieves and
So we are really glad that you, oops, I'm sorry. We are really glad that you came. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, whether you wanted to or not. But before you leave, and we are open for questions, but before you leave, look under your chair. One chair, and I don't know which one it is, somewhere in here has a piece of paper on it. That would be this color. And if it's your chair, you have your very own piece of Alaskan china. So who got the piece of paper? And do you guys have any questions, or did we answer things so thoroughly you now know it all?
Yeah. So anyone have any questions, raise your hand. I'll pass you the microphone. please try to speak clearly. We are recording, and this is really important to have the microphone.
Hi, sometimes I see really fascinating things along the shores in Alaska. I see some literature sometimes that says it's illegal to pick up things that are old archaeological. And can you shed any light on what stuff I could go for as my own personal treasure versus stuff I'd better just leave where it is?
So actually, there was a lawsuit quite a while ago. Some divers that I know were involved in it. You are allowed, the result of that lawsuit is you are allowed to pick up things that are like at the downtown docks, in places like that. If it is a historical site, you cannot. So, for example, we have 2 shipwrecks that are here right close in the Juneau area, the Sophia and the Kathleen. And you're not allowed to pick up anything from those wrecks. But if I find a piece of china or silverware from either of those wrecks at the downtown docks, then I can pick it up.
Next question.
So what are the usual diving depths you get to find these things at? In the sense, how deep do you go?
Well, it depends on where you are. I found some really cool things at 110 feet down in the Gatineau Channel. I also found at 80 feet diving off of Mayflower Island, I found an old horse-drawn fire cart. The visibility in the Gatineau Channel is so horrible. And I have gone back there and not been able to find that again because I wanted to go back and photograph it. Most of my diving, when I'm looking for treasure, is 110 and above.
Yeah. Any more questions?
Did the truck start after you guys got it out?
You know, that I do not know, but I do know the story behind that truck, and the story that was told by the person who lost the truck and the story of what I found when I found the truck were not the same.
We have time for a few more questions. Anyone? Okay.
It doesn't really have to do with any of the archaeology, but have you had any encounters with animals in your dives?
You want to tell?
So I will say that diving in Alaska, it's really relaxing to me because we don't normally, there's not like great white sharks, or I don't really think about that, but I do get a little nervous when we see sea lions. Sometimes sea lions can be very territorial and they can be very curious, and they're quite large. So we do see sea lions, and lion's mane jellyfish are also something I try to avoid.
And I have personally been surprised on night dives by humpback whales. And diving at Coubertin, ended up in the middle of a pod of killer whales. And so, yeah, we have lots and lots of tales of animal adventures.
Yes, but not sharks.
No, we do.
I
I have seen sharks.
I haven't.
Off in Coghlan. Salmon sharks. Somebody back there had a question.
Hi, I'm wondering if and how you kind of record the locations of your finds.
Have to wait for the microphone. Well, I have become much better at recording it and putting it on my boat's GPS unit. But I can tell you that if you look over here, there's a crucible that's from the old mining days. And I was diving in the channel and found this big pile of them. And I picked a few up. And I've been wanting to go back and pick up some more. and I didn't record where I had anchored the boat, and I have not been able to find them again. So we're getting a little bit better. I did have one spot marked on the boat, and we dove there, and there was bupkis. Well, actually, there wasn't bupkis. There was a Zynda bottle and that little crystal creamer, and nothing else. It was probably the cleanest bottom I've ever dove anywhere in Alaska. And I have no idea why I marked that spot on my GPS.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming tonight.
Thank
and
you.
thanks Annette and Lindsay. It was so awesome.
Who got the?
You guys are excellent storytellers. Did anyone find the yellow? There's. Oh no.
I have no idea what chair it is, so. It's in the third row, you guys. You better look under your chairs. Woo!
All right, we have a winner. Yay. Thanks again.
Thank
What a
you.
wonderful storytelling.
Oh, thank you
Okay,
for joining us.
We're going to have the next fireside lecture here on February 16th. That's a Friday as usual. Doors open at 6:30. Tales of Tales, how fluke patterns and blubber bits allow us to track the health of Juneau's whales. NOAA's Susie Tierlink
Oh,
will
yeah,
be
she's
here
awesome.
to
Susie's
tell you all
awesome.
about that. We hope to see you next week.
Hey. Oh, thank you. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah.
You bet.
I'm just kind of curious. You said this Sophia is located off of Vanderbilt or dragged off of Vanderbilt?
She's on Vanderbilt Reef,
What side of it?
the Juneau side. So she hit on the north end, and after 3 days, and we don't really know what happened because nobody was there, but she ended up coming completely across the rack or the reef and is now facing the opposite direction. We usually around June-ish go out there and put a mooring buoy on it. So if do you know? Did you want to ask a question? I'm just waiting.
Yeah. What kind of depth is it at?
The bow isn't bad. The bow is at 60-ish feet. The stern is 130, 140. You know, everything depends on tides. So let me bring these charts up and I can show you.
I just wanted to tell you I really liked it in that.
I'm glad you did. I hope you did you learn something?
Well, I definitely learned some new things about the bottles for sure. Yeah, where they came from.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Vanderbilt Reef should be somewhere around there.
Well, I've taken the ROV down with her a few times, and she told me about the cart off of Mayflower Island, and I've run the ROV back and forth there maybe a dozen times.
So
and she's
she
right.
hit.
It's like
So
looking
this
through
is
milk.
Skagway. This is
I took
Juneau.
my certification.
So she hit over here.
15
But
years
she's
ago.
laying
So we are like
this
4
way.
or 5 students settled down.
And you said you could see the front of it. Can I take a picture of that?
Sure.
And it took like good 5
And we
minutes.
put a mooring buoy
I
on
went
her,
with
and
her one
it
time on
usually
Sunshine
will be
Cove.
sitting somewhere
She
around
said the
here.
water was
And we put it on
and at one point I had the
in
ROV tipped
right
down
around
and
the
a
beginning
pack
of
raft
June,
above.
and we take it
They're
off
swimming
around
around.
the end
I'm
of
just pulling
September.
myself with the ROV.
This is not a
And I
place
looked
to
down at
take
the
light.
bottom for something.
Yeah, yeah.
By the time I looked out,
We had one dive here. There were 3 of us,
and I had to
and
look at their bubbles.
we were
coming
tied up to the
surface,
mooring buoy.
And I had my ROV on
And
the surface, and I'd zip over to where their
The
bubbles
water
were, and then
was,
had to
and
do
it
a
was
straight
flat
down
calm. The
dive.
water was
It was
crystal
only
clear.
like
You could
60
see the
feet
wreck
water,
laying
so-
way out there. It was
And
absolutely
I just catch 'em, like,
beautiful.
paddling 'em away, and
Thank
I'd
you.
be-
And literally, in the blink of an eye, in less than 10 seconds, the visibility went to nothing. And
It's not
I couldn't
something
see my
enjoy.
hand.
Like, I like being on the surface,
just-
sipping my beer, running with control.
And we had all kind of spread out. And I was like, oh, hell. Fortunately for me, I have actually 200 guys on that wreck, so I know it really, really well. And I knew that I was kind of along her spine, and I knew that way was where the mooring line was tied in, but I couldn't see. So I was right on the bottom, and I followed the spine, and I got to where I thought we would be tied in somewhere in that area, and I couldn't find it. So I took my compass and I started doing transects with my arm out like this, hoping that I would hit the line. And I was right at the point where I was doing my last transect, and I said, "This is it. I can't find it. I'm just going to take a bearing to the reef, swim over there, and see if I can find it." And my arm hit something, and that was the line.
Nice.
So I managed to get up to the boat. I picked up one of the dive buddies on the reef, and the other one was 1.5 miles down Lynn Canal. So it's the one big lesson I learned from that is, if at all possible, have somebody on that can come get you if things go wrong. Goes that way.
Do you ever take rope and tie it to the mooring line or something? Or
you can do that, but it's a large wreck, right? So if you want to, if you stay around the bow, it's not such a big deal because it's pretty shallow, right? But if you want to go down towards the stern, which is deep and dark, but that's where you'll find, sinks and toilets, the bar, all this, the stern winches, all this kind of cool stuff. The boilers, you're going to have to leave, you'll have to have a lot of rope, 400 feet of rope at least.
Are you waiting for?
Thank you.
You bet. Yeah. Are you thinking of going out there?
I haven't done any diving, but I'm interested in getting into it.
Oh, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah.
You bet.
So the GoPro only goes down a certain amount. What do you photograph for the rest of the dive is deeper?
I have when I'm not looking for treasure.
Yeah.
I carry, it's a little Sony CyberShot. It's in a housing with video lights.
Oh, okay.
And that's what I use. I may have I think I took a picture.
I'm Burger Bostrup from the Juneau Photo Group.
Oh, okay.
So good to meet you. Yeah, I recognize you. It's like, oh, I know that person.
Yeah. I was gonna.
Pictures to names is always good.
Yeah, I was going to show you. Yeah, this is not a photograph. This was not a photographic presentation. I was going to show you what I usually use. I thought I had a photo of the setup, but I guess I don't. Actually, I really know that I do. I'm not seeing it right now. But it's simple. It's big.
Mm-hmm.
By the time you get...
Yeah, we love the photos, so just keep putting them in there.
Oh, I have the easy part because all I have to do is show up. That Mother Nature is...
Yeah.
It's amazing underwater. And, people think here that it's so cold that it's dead, but it's so full of life. And it is as colorful as anything you'll see in the tropics. And you've got an emerald green sea and rocks that are hot pink, and it's like, whoa, It's pretty awesome.
Well, good. Nice to.
It's nice to meet you.
Likewise, thank you.
Yeah.
I just was thinking human remains. When you've been down there and you find...
I found 4 human skulls.
Yeah, and do you do anything? I mean, do you report it to anybody?
Or? Yeah, I bring them up and turn them over to the police department.
Yeah.
One of them was really interesting. One of them was found on a Halloween dive.
Oh.
And it was at the downtown docks, and it was very old, but it had the most beautiful, and I should have taken a photo of it, and I didn't, had the most beautiful gold bridge work. Real primitive, very, very primitive. It was just gorgeous.
Oh, and so somebody had money that got their teeth fixed.
Yeah, somebody had money in the old days and got their teeth fixed.
4 skulls, huh?
Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, well, thank you so much.
You
that
bet.
was really wonderful.
Oh, I'm glad you enjoyed it.
It took a lot of time to put it together.
Oh, it was really fun to put together. The hardest part was trying to figure out what do I not use, right? Because there's so many stories, and particularly when you look at medicine bottles, because it's just really fascinating.
All those illegal things.
Yeah. You bet.